I'm one of the project managers for this, and I'm also learning a lot about parking, so this has been a great project for me. We also have our Assistant City Manager, Angela Robinson Pignon, and then Jim Myers, who's our parking maven. And Angela will be making a few comments in a second, but before we get started on talking about projects, I think having a little context can be really helpful. And so the policy that we're going to be getting your feedback on was last updated in 2012, which is quite a while ago. And so why are we getting your feedback? You may or may not know, but our city council has adopted a 3-year strategic plan, and one of those objectives is to work on updating the residential parking permit policy, and that's listed as objective B13. I will share where you can get that in a second. We have a website that is fully dedicated to this entire project. We will be putting a comprehensive survey that we have put together to kind of give feedback on some specific key points that we'll be discussing today. We're also doing that in Spanish as well. And then you can find more information on the history of this project and some other work that we've done. So I really encourage you to visit that website. You can sign up, get alerts, and we're also going to take all of your information from here. We can provide you with more information. So yes, thank you for signing up. And then I just wanted to say something, and Amy, I really appreciate your comment on this, but really the goal is for us to get feedback from you and to engage with you, and that will help inform this draft policy. So thank you for being here and for giving us your ideas. We will take them and use them to create this policy. So I just wanted to be really clear about that, because I think it can be helpful to know that we're really here for you. And so with that, I'm going to hand it over to Angela, who is our Assistant City Manager. She's going to make some comments, and then we will kick it off with Julie, who is our consultant.
All right, thank you, Priya. So again, welcome. One of the things I also wanted to note that the policy that we're contemplating updating that was created in 2012 is a voluntary policy. So some of you may be familiar with a project that was contemplated by the city in East San Rafael that would have been a mandatory parking permit program. This is not that. This is a voluntary program where a group of neighbors would get together and petition the city to have a residential parking zone established. Some of these parameters are already in the policy from 2012, and one of the complaints that we heard from some residents is the thresholds in order to have a zone established is much too high. And so the current policy requires 1,500 households to participate at a minimum in the program. And so you can imagine that in the city of San Rafael, that is quite a large number of households. And so there are actually no voluntary residential parking zones that exist in the city at this moment, because 1,500 is quite a bit. So again, want to reiterate, this is a voluntary program where you would get together with your neighbors, talk about the issues, petition the city, and then we would kind of go from there. And Jim Myers and Julie Dixon are here to answer any questions about the technical aspects of what would go into a voluntary residential parking program. And so with that, once again, Jim Myers, and I'm going to hand it off to Julie Dixon.
Great, thank you so much. And thank you all for coming out today. So my name is Julie Dixon. I'm joined by my colleague, Erin, in the back there. She's actually going to be diligently taking notes. I'm actually going to give you a little bit of an overview of just parking management, residential parking permit programs, also known as preferential parking permit programs. We're going to talk a little bit about this, but intentionally today we really want to hear from all of you. And anybody that's attended a parking meeting before that you've heard me speak at, one of the things that we bring to all of our meetings is a parking magic wand. So I'm gonna ask you this question now so that you can ponder this as I give you some information. We always like to ask, if you had a parking magic wand and you could change, fix, or improve anything about parking in your neighborhood, what would you use it for? So ponder that question. My intention here is to give you a little bit of an overview about residential parking programs, some of the things that are happening specifically in California that are affecting housing developments, accessory dwelling units, and some of the factors that are influencing other nearby communities that I thought would be helpful for you to know about, so that when we talk about kind of the pros and cons associated with a parking permit program, what that can look like. I just wanted to share a little bit about, yes, I am a parking consultant. I work all across the country, very much with a specialty in California, in particular in residential parking permit programs. And I've worked with programs all across the state, including programs where the city of Costa Mesa completely revamped their residential parking permit program. They went from a program that had an excess of 70 parking permit zones, and they ended up going down to 21. And then also we're working on a project in Santa Ana, which Santa Ana happens to be, I believe, the 7th most densely populated city in the United States, and trying to mitigate the number of cars and the number of people. And I think that that's the reason why I like to set that precedent, because when we start to talk about the next slide, Priya, if you wouldn't mind being my clicker, it's important when we talk about parking. And what I like to talk about when we talk about parking is the importance of not having a Band-Aid solution. And I think it's important, and I really appreciated what Angela and Priya shared with you about the fact that your policy hasn't been updated in so long. It's important that we don't just jump the shark, as we can, I think many of you appreciate that term, and we want to make sure that we get it right, and that we find a right-sized adaptive solution that works for your community. And I think what's really important when we talk about parking is, I always like to talk about the core concepts of parking management, because the reality is parking touches your life. It touches where you live, it touches where you work. And it's really important that when we think about policies and solutions, is that we don't want to jump the gun, and we want to be sure that we're cognizant of, again, your ability to come home at the end of work and be able to find a parking space near your home. And I think that those are some of the core things that maybe some of us may take for granted because it's just always been there. But that's one of the things that when we talk about Band-Aid solutions, we want to be sure that we get to the core root of the problem, because we don't want to just push a problem from one side of the community to another. And oftentimes you see that happen when we talk about parking management solutions. You come up with that Band-Aid solution and the problem just reappears. And so it's really important, this conversation, and why I so appreciate all of you being here tonight, is because as we talk about shaping this policy and what this can look like here in San Rafael, is to really hear from you all as residents, to understand what your needs are, so that we really can get to the root of the issue. Because the worst kind of situation is when we're reacting to the problem. The reality is we want to be sure that we build a sustainable, sound policy that really works holistically for the community as a whole. And I say this because you're going to hear, as I talk about different residential parking permit programs, about some of the positives and negatives that do come along with a program like that. While sometimes it might be a fix for one problem, it could actually create other repercussions. And I'd really like to have a very candid conversation with you all about that, so that as we're talking about what this policy could look like in the city, that we're really thinking about what that really could mean, because it really does come down to quality of life, where you live, and the reality of your ability to have guests over for, a Sunday supper, or, to be able to have a child's birthday party and know that people have a place to park. And so that's the reality of what we're talking about here today. And we'll really get into some of the weeds overall on how that and what that can look like. These last two bullets are really important because, again, with East San Rafael, if anybody's paid any attention to some of the challenges that we've had there, a lot of the things that we've had to deal with there really comes down to data. So when we do talk about programs citywide, it's really important that oftentimes in communities that I've worked with, the loudest voice wins in some cases, and that might not necessarily be the holistic viewpoint. And one of the things that why we want to talk about using data is because in my career, I've been doing this now for well more than 30 years. Sometimes parking can become political, and oftentimes it can be contentious. And what we don't want to do is pit neighbor on neighbor. And this is the reason why I like to talk about data, is because when we talk about policy recommendations and policy decisions, we want to be sure that we're looking at the data and understanding the impact of demand, the impact of the number of cars that are parking and for how long they're parking. Oftentimes I'll come into a community and it turns out that they maybe don't need a permit program, but maybe they need something for that car, that the person who has 11 cars that they're juggling on the street, or the person that's running an auto repair shop out of their garage, or those kinds of factors. Those are different challenges that we want to really, again, get to that core root. And that's the reason why I always like to talk about the importance of data. Opinions matter, perceptions matter, don't get me wrong, but it's really important that we also rely on the data so that we can actually use the facts to back up the recommendations. And this last piece is really important, and I really want to highlight on compliance. I know Jim's perfect goal would to be never write another parking ticket in this city. And when you talk about it, that you can, laugh and chuckle, but in a perfect parking managed world, everybody follows the rules, right? No tickets need to be written. You shake your head because that's not reality, right? And the goal, though, whenever we talk about designing an optimized parking management solution, is to try to design a program that's easy for you to follow the rules and easy for you to comply. Ultimately, tickets get written because people break the rules, they take advantage of the policy, etc. And so while this is idealistic, the goal is always to design a solution that's focused on compliance. The goal truly is to not write parking tickets. And so I like to highlight that because that's an important part of anything when we talk about parking management, is to try to design a program. I always use the tagline, easy, convenient, and accessible. And accessible also means equitable. And equitable is going to be really important as we go to the next slide, Priya, because one of the things that's important when we talk about a residential permit program, sometimes you'll hear me call it RPP, and you also heard me reference preferential parking permit program. Some communities call it different things, but it's basically the same terminology. You can have PPP or RPP, and that's basically a permit program that governs policy in a neighborhood. So I just want to make sure that we're all talking about the same language, because it's important that we all have a similar understanding. Now, as we get into this, I want to talk about California specifically. I am not a politician. I am also a California resident. I do not live in San Rafael. I want everybody to know all of these details. What's important is, over the last several years, there have been a number of policies that have been approved and legislated in Sacramento. And many of you might have already enjoyed some of the benefits that have come along with this, including the ability to build accessory dwelling units on your property, or ADUs. Some people call them mother-in-law units. There's SB 10, where you can basically take a residential property and develop up to 10 units on a residential parcel. The other one that was a big one that passed a few years ago was the ability to build residential within a half mile of a transit stop without providing parking. That's a big one. Now, I say that because in my line of work, we're now starting to see those parcels come to reality. And what's often happening in many communities that I work in is that residents like yourselves are going, when did that happen? Like, who approved that? We're accustomed to building an apartment building that had, 1.5 parking spaces per bed type of situation. And now we're in a position where, especially in Northern California, most developments are within a half a mile of a transit stop. Now, we can have a whole sidebar conversation on developer decisions on whether or not to provide parking, etc. But this is the reality that we're dealing with. I share that because when we talk about what is a residential parking permit program, it really comes down to that first bullet. It's about protecting neighborhood quality of life from external impacts. Now, I want to talk about external impacts because this line that's in bold right here is really really important. And I have to tell you that there are several cities already in California who are already facing challenges where cities that have tried to establish residential parking permit programs to prohibit those new developments from participating in those programs. And guess what? The lawsuits have already started, and we're already seeing challenges where you're not able to prevent the people that aren't supposed to allegedly have cars from participating. So I say that because I wanted to come back to this first bullet about external impacts. You heard me mention Costa Mesa very explicitly because one of the things that when that program got redesigned, RPP really kind of came out of about the 1950s when multifamily development started to get developed adjacent to single-family neighborhoods. And what we started to see, especially in the 50s, was that's when residential parking permit programs really started. And it was, I want to keep those people off of my block face, and that's really how RPP kind of came into fruition. In 2016, the State Attorney General here in California published an opinion. Now mind you, it was an opinion that said, you municipality cannot distinguish the difference between a single family home or a multifamily home. Basically, we're taking the walls down and you can't prohibit multifamily dwellings from participating in a residential parking permit program. So at that time, the city of Costa Mesa decided to re-engineer their residential parking permit program because originally that 70 plus different zones had eliminated the ability for multifamily to participate. So what they ended up doing was they created what I call the big three. There had to be one of three external impacts to dictate and determine whether or not your neighborhood could qualify to be a part of a residential parking permit program. And those three impacts, one of them is you're adjacent to a commercial district. So you have basically a commercial district that has spillover from the restaurants or stores into the residential neighborhood. So that was one reason why you could have a residential parking permit program. A second reason would be you're adjacent to a neighboring city where you have spillover from the neighboring city coming on to your city streets and basically taking up your amenities. And the third external impact was you were affected by a venue. And a venue could be anything from like a high school, a hospital, a fairground, a concert venue, something like that. So that's really where this concept of the external impacts became very relevant. And now we've started to see since that time, which was that project started in about 2018 after that opinion got published. And now we've seen that revamp, and now many programs throughout California have been updating their policies along with all of the state legislation changes. So I say that because what you also heard mentioned at the beginning is when we start to talk about these RPP programs, it was really important to recognize these are voluntary programs. When we talk about those three impacts, what you also want to try to do is design a program to address the impact. And I'll use the example of a high school. If you have a high school where you have bleed over into your neighborhood, a neighborhood can get together, draw a petition, and say, we need access to our residential streets because during the school day, it's overloaded. The students choose to park on our streets. They don't park in the school parking lot, et cetera, et cetera. So through that petitioning process, there's some occupancy processes, which we'll talk about. Ultimately, if that program is deemed by the neighborhood and ultimately approved by council and everything goes through all the checks and balances, which we'll talk about here in a moment, the program isn't necessarily a 24/7 program. A program like that would be designed based on the impact. So if it's school days, for example, so it's like a Monday through Wednesday school year type of program. A really standard design for a solution like that is usually like 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. and maybe Friday nights for football games. So that's a great example of how you design a solution. I use the example of a neighboring city where you have spillover. That's a great example of a community that might have a program, an RPP program that's designed where there's no overnight parking without a permit allowed between 2 a.m. and 5 a.m. That basically keeps the neighboring city from parking on your streets because not everyone's gonna wanna get up every night at 2 a.m. and ultimately move their car. So I like to describe that because the reason why you want to ensure that you're addressing the external impact is because this is where some of the negatives come along with a residential parking permit program. You heard me mention Sunday supper or a kid's birthday party. When you start to have a program that has a 24/7 impact, that also affects the number of guest passes that you get to have, the number of times you can have visitors. I share this because while there's pluses with an RPP program, there's also negatives. And so I like to be very candid with an audience like you because while there might be some real gems that help me address this, I don't necessarily think about the commitments or the sacrifices that I do have to make. And oftentimes when we start to talk about implementation of a residential parking permit program, some of the biggest sticking points are how many guest passes do I get? How much do I have to pay for a parking permit program? How much do I have to pay for a guest pass? What happens if I use my allotment of guest passes? These are all things that ultimately help drive how these programs are managed. But I just wanted to really kind of lay that out here because when we start to talk about those restrictions and those time limits, this is also an important factor. When we talk about non-permitted vehicles and we start to talk about some of those external impacts, most communities will have time limits on the street that you're exempt from during the permitted hours. So using the high school as the example, I saw a lot of head nods in the audience. Let's just say there's a permit program that is school days, 7 a.m. to 3 p.m. And then you as a resident would qualify for a permit. Again, everything goes through, the neighborhood agrees, everything's approved. Ultimately, you would qualify to purchase a parking permit that would allow you to park on street exempt of any posted time limit. So that's really kind of the core root of how a permit program works. But I also want you to understand that permit is not a get out of jail free card. It doesn't mean that you can store your vehicle for more than 72 hours per the California Vehicle Code. It doesn't mean that you're exempt from the street sweeping rules. All of those factors are really important to understand. Those rules still apply to everyone. What it truly is to, again, address that external impact. So I'm gonna pause there for just a moment because I know I covered quite a bit of information and I just wanna see from what I've described thus far, does anyone have any questions off of anything that I've shared? Because I just kind of wanted to be sure. Yes, sir.
Here's some water.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate
You
it.
just said that if it's not one of those, this is an opinion, it wasn't a legal opinion, it was just, but you said under that opinion, if it's not one of those three exceptions, it has to be a voluntary permit, but it cannot be a mandatory parking permit?
Great question. So this ultimately comes down to how the policy ultimately gets written. And what we have found that has worked very well in California, and let's talk about the process. What most communities have done through adoption to the code, and I want to be sure that when I share the opinion that was published in 2016, it was specifically about multifamily versus single family, that you can't distinguish the difference between the two. I wanted to be sure everybody understood that is the
What
case.
about proximity though?
So-
you talking about the same block?
Let's talk about
You're talking about multifamily 3 blocks away.
Great question. So one of the things, and what I'm going to try to describe to you is what some other communities have done. And these are the things that would have to be considered by your city and by you as residents. So what a lot of cities have done is, when Angela shared that the 1,500 mark today, like that 1,500 residents would have to participate in the petitioning process. What many communities have done is they've said 4 contiguous blocks have to get together and basically sign the petition, and depending upon where council falls, this number is very debated in many communities. Many communities say 65% of those 4 contiguous blocks have to sign that petition and say, I want this program. That's a good example of what many communities have done, is to say, they set a zone, and it has to be a certain length or a certain area, and in this case 4 contiguous blocks. But then here was the clincher, and this is what has happened in other communities. Adjacent blocks, let's just say those 4 contiguous blocks, everybody's in, the majority signs off, all the bells and whistles are there. Adjacent blocks can ultimately petition in to that zone as well. And at a certain point, you'll have to design boundaries, but that's basically what's happening when we start to talk about opening access and making sure that you're not drawing boundaries to prohibit participation. And that's what's really important. Yes, sir.
So what you're saying is all the new buildings that were approved under the fiction, it seems, that they're not supposed to have cars because they're near a transportation hub, that's all just BS.
So the reality of the way that we're finding today, and again, this hasn't been challenged here, but I will just say my experience in other communities is that they're finding that they are not able to prohibit participation. And so this is why
So it's all just bullshit.
it's basically the challenge for how the legislation has been approved. And so that's where the challenge is, the liability aspects of it, and that's where it hasn't been challenged here. But I want to be realistic with you all so that when we have this conversation, these are the conversations that I also will say this. It's very important at our legislative level that you need to also be communicating with our legislators, because there's continued policy that is being passed in Sacramento that are going to affect where you live.
So our quality of life just doesn't matter.
Well,
And
beyond that,
I don't want to say that it doesn't matter, because that's not what we're here to talk about. I just want to make sure that you understand
Yeah, no,
that
I
these are
understand.
state level decisions. Yes, ma'am.
So, actually two, so that California policy would override, say, city policy?
Yes, at this point, yes, ma'am.
Okay, and my other question is, voluntary doesn't mean free.
Thank you for asking that. And so this is where I'll get into these last 3 bullets. So this is great. Thank you for that's a great question. So one of the things about residential parking permit programs is that the Proposition 26 basically is very specific regarding residential parking permits, is that the city needs to design a program that basically the cost of the permit pays for the program itself. That includes personnel, signage, enforcement, the software program, all the bells and whistles that come along with a program like that. But what they can't do is they're not supposed to design a program that's meant to generate revenue for the city. They can't consider it another tax. So it's really important when you start to look at the design of a residential parking permit program, you need to design it in a way where the parking permit program is really, again, intended to be just the cost of the operation of the program. Yes, sir.
Do you consider this residential parking program in the category of a Band-Aid? Because it doesn't address the root problem.
So I really appreciate your comment, because truthfully, again, being a California resident myself, this is an issue that's happened in Sacramento, and policies that have been approved that are affecting where we all live is definitely a really big challenge. And I really feel bad, truthfully, for the city governments because of the fact that they have been handed these policies, and you as residents are discovering them now as the projects are being approved and as they basically are already being deployed. And so it's definitely a very different set of rules than, like I said, there used to be a minimum number of parking spaces that had to be provided, but this whole bigger picture reality of, people not having cars in California is absolutely problematic. And I'm not passing the buck here. The reality is the cities have to deal with this, but the state has handed down these mandates. And that's why it's so important to have this conversation, because the reality of a residential parking permit program, while it can address certain aspects in your neighborhood, it won't necessarily solve for all of the issues. And I want to really highlight this when we talk about equitability. You can't eliminate others from participating. And so that's why I wanted to have this candid conversation. Trust me, I don't enjoy being the one to pass this information to you all, but I'd rather be realistic with you so that you also understand what this could look like and also what benefits that it could bring. But I also want everybody to understand some of the negatives. Yes, ma'am.
I was wondering if there are any jurisdictions in Marin County that you have worked with or have implemented residential permit programs.
There's several that have some elements of the programs, but I will say that what you're really starting to see is them becoming smaller and smaller because of the fact that some of the historical rules that have happened have started to basically lessen and lighten. Even in the city of Sausalito, we're seeing changes coming as a result of their program as well. And so I think that you're just really starting to see the needle really shifting, and neighbors like yourself trying to hold on and trying to, again, get the word out about kind of like what this basically means. So, but I do appreciate the question about cost. Yes, ma'am.
So, my question is about multifamily buildings.
Yep.
Are equally eligible. Does that mean each individual unit, or as a whole, you take that unit as the building that might house 30 apartments?
It's a great question, and I'm gonna say this. Each community that I have worked with has interpreted it slightly differently. And so I think that that's one of the areas when we start to talk about policy, ultimately that can influence some of your rules and regulations. So I think that that's where some of the gray area can come into play. There's certain things like voting rights. Most of the communities that we've worked with have allowed each individual unit to participate. So I think that's a good thing to understand and know. Yes, ma'am.
So my question is, I hear from you that a lot of cities are dealing with issues of, Sacramento is trying to solve the housing problem.
That's right.
And so therefore they're allowing everybody to, maximize buildings on their properties, et cetera. And one of the issues that's always been is this parking requirement. Well, they're trying to minimize parking, not only for residential, high-rise units or multi-level, but also I see it happening in commercial projects where the parking spaces are getting smaller, and seems like people are not necessarily are downsizing car sizes, but I have trouble getting my car parked in some shopping centers, and so it's happening throughout, everywhere. And I'm wondering if there is any organization that actually is taking this feedback from all the different cities and how this multifamily development, which is helping, obviously it's a great concept, but it's only helping, part of our housing issue.
Sure.
So how do we deal with the rest of it? What's the effect on the overall communities, within every city? Is anyone coming back and saying, look, this is wonderful, but look what's happening to our cities?
So
What are the effects?
It's still so early that I don't think that the voices have bubbled up loud enough yet, because what you have is the housing advocacy side of where that real voice has come and the influence that's happened on a lot of the legislation. So I think that that's important to recognize. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, this is very informative. I understood that we were invited here to give input
Yes, we're going to
on the
yes.
implementation of a parking program. This suggests that there is a parking program waiting in the wings, only to be implemented.
No.
And if that is the case, I've not received any notice of it, or no opportunity to be heard about it, and I have a few comments about that. Will there be time in this meeting to
Yes.
have input?
Yes, yes, ma'am. And I apologize. Because I saw so many concerned faces, I wanted to just be sure that as we talked about kind of what a residential parking permit program is, I just wanted to be sure, because I saw so many looks of consternation, that I just wanted to be sure and address that. So why don't we go ahead and go to the next slide?
They
if
just
that's
have
okay.
20 minutes.
Yeah,
For
thank
their
you.
presentation,
Yeah.
the rest is Q&A.
20 minutes is insufficient.
Yeah.
No, they have.
the rest
Our
is-
presentation, yeah.
Okay.
So,
we have
It's
an
now,
hour, so
it's
we're
now
at 20 minutes.
7:40, that's
No,
20
no.
minutes.
so we'll get right to
Break
the
at 8:30.
communication part of it. So I just wanted to highlight, for everything that we basically talked about, it's important to understand for the project goals, it's important to recognize that when we talk about improving the residential parking experience with everything that I just shared, it also comes down to equity and accessibility. We want to make sure that everyone in the neighborhood has access to the curb. And as we basically go through this methodology, it's really important to talk about this key right here is where we're about to get into, is the stakeholder input. And when we ultimately design whatever program based on your feedback, I think that's really key, is that today, that's part of why we highlighted the 2012 aspect of this, is that because there's been talk about needs, I saw some head nodding when I mentioned the high school, that there's some areas that there have impacts, so we know that there's some communities that have a need. So we wanted to be sure that we had some specifics for you all, so that way as we move this forward, you all have that information. We can go to the next slide, Priya. So where are we today? You all asked about, so we've actually done some basic work. When we talked about the parking ordinance update, that was really about a future proofing of just some very old terminology that was in the current municipal code. Here's where we are today, is to really talk about the formulation of what an RPP policy could look like based on that feedback. We do have a survey that Priya mentioned, and the survey will be released by next week. You can find the link on the city website, as well as there will be a press release about that. The survey is going to be posted for at least a month so that we can gather that information and ultimately take this process forward with whatever that feedback is from all of the key stakeholders, so that we can take a preliminary policy that's based on public input. Next slide. And so one of the things that we have done is we have collected some data, and it looks like the map might not be showing up. Maybe one more click potentially. Oh, no, go back one more. So what we have done is we've done some preliminary data collection in some of the areas that we've had some feedback, so that way, again, depending upon where the community's interest is, there's some opportunity to have develop some of the data from some of those areas. And if we go to the next slide, this is really the core focus of the conversation that we wanted to obviously have today. The question that I asked you at the beginning was if you were able to change or fix something about parking in your neighborhood, what you would use that for. We can change that format if it's easier for you all, but we just thought this would be a good way to kind of get the conversation going. The opportunity to pass the magic wand around throughout the room, but I'm also happy to take your hands, and if there's something specific that you'd rather shift the focus towards, I'm open to whatever approach you would all feel. Yes,
Hold
ma'am.
on,
Oh, sorry.
Julie, before you start, is there more presentation after this?
No, just the contact information, so everybody has
Okay,
Priya's
I'd like
contact info.
Richard Bernstein to take over at this point in time, so he can call on people and make sure that the suggestions are constructive, and why don't you come on up here?
Is it also okay, because there might be some questions, should I stay up here so I can?
Please stay
Yeah.
up
You
here.
stay here because what I'm gonna do is point to somebody,
Perfect.
they're gonna ask a question, and you're
Great.
gonna answer.
Perfect, love it. Thank you.
So I'm not sure what my role is, but
I
here we go.
appreciate
Okay, so, sir.
So, San Rafael, like a lot of communities, has allowed development forever without adequate parking. And we get to this point, we go, oh, there's a parking problem. And it seems like the solution is never to develop more parking, to require more parking built, but to come up with a permit program, which is basically making parking a prohibitive sport for a lot of people, penalizing people. And if you do these neighborhoods, well, you have all these situations where, what do you do if your kids come home from college? What do you do if you're going to Europe for a month and somebody's staying at your house and they're bringing some other people over? What do you do if your kids want to have a sleepover party and there's another 10 cars? What do you do if you're a VBRO? And why do we have to pay for that?
So great question, and so this is the reason why when we mentioned voluntary, is that if a neighborhood wants to have a parking permit program, it needs to be by majority, and then ultimately if a program is implemented, you try to design a program that has a solution that works for that community need. Like I mentioned, to try to mitigate the hours of operation so that it doesn't affect quality of life, but the reality of how many parking permits a household gets, those are when you start to get into the administrative guidelines. So that if a program is approved by majority in that neighborhood, ultimately everybody is basically conceding and agreeing to the business rules associated with that. Many communities set thresholds of, in some communities it's no more than 4 licensed drivers per household is a great example. And in some neighborhoods, it can be 50 guest passes per year. Those are all sorts of different limitations that do come along with the program. Sometimes there's waivers during the holiday season, but everything that you've just described are some of the the limitations that do come along with a residential parking permit program.
You, me? So is in your scope and what you're suggesting to the city, is the residential parking permit program one small part of it? Because it really is sort of like trying to take a problem and compress it all into a small space. For instance, we're in the Bay Point Lagoons area, and a lot of the problem is that there are people in the canal who have work trucks, and they park their trucks overnight, and then they come early in the morning, and they get in their trucks and park their cars. And they have services, paid services, where people help shuttle them back and forth. So it seems like putting the burden on the residential areas is really it seems like it's very myopic. What about the commercial areas? Like creating a permit program where they could park their cars that are commercial cars and keeping those out of flooding the residential areas. Is there a program that you're looking at to do that?
So for the design that we were describing for a neighborhood that would have an external impact would be something that most agencies have replicated that type of a model. It's typically not neighbor versus neighbor. It's an external impact where, because of the state rules, that's really what starts to determine whether or not a neighborhood would be eligible. But when we do start to talk about that type of density or that type of external impact, looking at options for shared parking agreements, alternative parking options, those all do come into play. And that's an important conversation when you start to talk about the design of a program and how it ultimately can work. But using the example that you've used, it doesn't necessarily fall into the examples that I was sharing about having an external impact. It becomes a neighbor versus neighbor impact. And that's part of the challenge that we have in that location.
But isn't there a way of, it seems like just logically, if you've got work trucks that you're parking and taking up all the residential streets, there must be something that the city can do, whether it's creating parking at night for those, where they could go, or give them a residential, make a restriction of certain kind of work trucks. But it just seems like, maybe I'm misunderstanding what you're saying, that
No.
it's sort of we can't really do it because it's a neighbor to neighbor thing. But this is logically, this is not neighbor to neighbor. This is commercial versus residential.
So one thing I'll add to what you've described is, unfortunately, the majority of those vehicles are not commercial vehicles. So like if that was Joe's Plumbing, do you know what I mean? And I think that that's part of the challenge when we talk about a number of the vehicles that you're describing, that while they're used for commercial purposes, I think that that's part of the challenge, because many cities have been able to create restrictions on oversized vehicles, commercial trucks, like being able to park a big rig, for example. So I think that that's part of the challenge when we start to talk about the dilemma that you described.
I would like to second this gentleman's comment. It sounds to me like we're defining away a lot of potential solutions by using this buzz phrase of neighbor to neighbor, when in fact what the city is doing is externalizing the parking issue that affects everyone onto certain neighborhoods. In its evaluation report that the city finally posted in April of this year, there were numerous alternatives that the city could do other than pushing this problem into neighborhoods. Each of them was dismissed without too much discussion, like, oh, the school district didn't want to cooperate. Well, maybe the neighbors don't want to cooperate either. And maybe the city needs to take an action towards the school district or the businesses or the areas where there are parking lots that are not used at night, and use that resource instead of eliminating it by your magic wand and making it a neighborhood issue. I will just say, since I don't know if I'll be able to have a chance to raise my hand again, I live in the Bret Harte neighborhood. I do not want a parking permit program for the reasons stated last February when that proposal came into our neighborhood at very short notice. We were blindsided, there was a public outcry, and we were dropped for good reason. Those same reasons still exist, and I will object to any parking program in my neighborhood. Further, if the city is publishing a survey, that survey should not be a forced choice survey.
Exactly.
The current survey promoted by the Federation is a forced choice survey. It assumes that there is a permit and it only asks that it assumes that there's a problem, first of all. What time is the problem is the only question. Second problem, it assumes there's going to be a permit, and how many permits is the only question in this bogus survey. So if the city is going to publish a different survey, it needs to be unbiased.
Let me just say, we're not promoting anything. These are the questions that this department sent to us. We do not promote anything aside from transparency.
What we're trying to do is create forums like this. We are creating access to information. We are not promoting a solution.
But if you didn't ask if there was a problem, you just said which hours
Can't
do you
hear
have a
you.
problem? I'm sorry,
Well,
it
we
wasn't my
define
turn.
the problem a priori without asking what
Exactly.
the problem is, so that
Yeah.
your solutions only address your problem, not our problem. Because you've already defined the problem in your scope of your timeline. We're already past like stage 1, 2, 3, 4,
Exactly.
5.
Yes.
So you're defining, in your first slide, you said the problem, and I'm like, what is the problem?
Right.
You've already figured it out, you didn't ask
Yeah.
us.
Right.
Could you roll back to that slide that shows where we are on the timeline?
So the timeline slide through.
Thank you.
And see, the problem is like, should be defined at the very beginning. You didn't ask us anything, you're coming to us now when we're almost done.
Neighborhood conditions, what's that?
So
Like what data you collect,
Yes.
define on what problem, what the issue is, defines what data you collect, defines what research conditions you research. You know, I'm a lawyer, you define the issue and that determines what you're gonna do about it. The issue is everything, and you haven't defined the issue for us.
So just to, so I
You've
heard,
defined it, we haven't defined it.
understand. So this is where, again, because this is where we are here in terms of, this was baseline research, as I heard mentioned here, this was key. to-
Baseline of what?
Baseline of occupancy.
Baseline of the problem that you defined.
Baseline of occupancy in the
Yeah, Baseline of a
neighborhoods
problem you defined,
that the
not that we
city has
defined.
received feedback from
Yeah.
neighborhoods on
Like I
impacted
said.
no areas.
Yeah.
Can I just ask a question
Yeah.
on the data? I didn't see, I saw 3 distinct areas, it seemed like. Are you gonna continue that data into other neighborhoods? Cause I don't think Bay Point Lagoons or some of our neighborhoods were even considered at this point.
So these 3 locations were basically initially identified in the initial research phase because data was collected on when we did the East San Rafael project, So this was, again, some baseline data to understand from feedback that we'd had of concerns in these areas.
But are you going to expand that research and
So-
data?
This current phase of where we are in terms of getting stakeholder feedback, this is right now, there's no intention today to collect data. The intention is to gather stakeholder feedback in order to then determine the next steps in the project.
Could you define stakeholder, please?
Sure.
And how does one learn if they're a stakeholder?
So stakeholders are basically all of you.
But we never got any questions about,
That's where we are when you look at that timeline. That's part of where we're talking about of where we are right now with the survey that's going out. This is the first of the stakeholder meetings.
So we're gonna get a survey?
Yes, that's what the survey is gonna come out next week. So there's a survey that will be published next week, that'll be published for a month. It'll be on the city's website and there will be a press release about that survey as well, so that you can share that with your neighbors and be able to answer those questions.
Yes.
Have there any studies been done, like looking at the city and the streets, the layouts, the widths, and looking at changing some of the way the parking is managed right now, how people are parking? For instance, if you make a street one way and angle the parking, you almost double the amount of parking, because it's happened in some areas, some cities. Has any of that been done in San Rafael to look at it and say, look, if we take, let's say, we're in Bay Point Lagoons, and if they take the canal area as a very, high density residential, and obviously they're short of parking, and I totally understand. Have they looked at those streets and changed the pattern and the design of the street and parking to double it and accommodate it?
So-
instead of, just saying, okay, you know what, this is what it is, we can't change anything.
Yep.
Or looking at, one of the solutions, I think one of you was speaking in the back, overnight, a lot of, shopping centers and grocery stores and all that, they have empty parking lots.
Right.
And that's where a lot of the people come from some other areas and park their, commercial vehicles, if you wanna call it. And I think if there was some kind of a program where they are promoted, they're what's the word?
Allowed.
Yes, they, you make them say, look, here's your opportunity to do either free parking or very, small amount of fee or whatever, to give them an incentive to do that.
So there,
Other solutions other than just permitting what's there.
So there have been examples where the city has made engineering improvements to try to accommodate more parking. One of the things that when you talk about the petitioning process, for example, in the majority of cities, when you submit a petition, one of the things that it usually happens is that a public works or a traffic engineering department gets involved to also assess the location to determine if there are opportunities for engineering improvements or the like. There's another rule that many of you are probably familiar with that also passed in California a year and a half ago, which was the daylighting ordinance, for example, where you can't park within 20 feet on the approach to an intersection. That eliminated parking in many neighborhoods as well. And again, that's another state law that the city doesn't get to opt out of that. But engineering is definitely a factor, and that's something that when you look at those types of density impacts, that's one of many things that are looked at to see what kind of improvements can be made.
So has that been done?
Yeah, that's what I said. There's been several examples of that in the city that they've done that, specifically down in the canal streets, where they've been able to make some improvements. You maybe notice where they put the angled parking in, for example, over by the community center, as well as it's small area, but when you start to look at the density and the sizes of the streets, there are certain engineering requirements with how wide a street can be before you can make improvements like that, as well as many of you maybe have seen the hash marks where they mark the parking spaces as well to try to lessen the implication on driveways and accessible ramps as well.
Okay, thank you. You mentioned something that might fall into this magic wand, and I think there's more suggestions along that. It's been mentioned that there's not enough parking in the canal area. We know that. I mean, this is a given. And yet, it's not a problem the city can't solve. The root problem is there's not enough parking. But there's acres of empty land around there that's not good for being built on, that could be used for parking. And that fits to the root problem. Now, a lot of neighborhoods couldn't do that, but the city does have the right to inverse condemnation, and they could use that to make parking. If they're gonna allow these buildings where there's obviously not enough parking, they're gonna have to go the next step and make parking.
Here, here.
Yes.
I'm in the Santa Fe High School area, and as much as I would love to have a permit parking there to prevent the students, I think it's unreasonable, honestly. Is there an opportunity to adopt something similar to, I believe it's Marin Academy, who is a private institution and has a required carpooling program to keep the cars out of the local streets? Is there an opportunity to do something like that with Santa Fe, Terra Linda, my alma mater, just to lessen the impact? I mean, I sit every morning and I see 5 cars arrive and the kids all wait for each other and then they all walk in together.
Right.
And so that would be one opportunity. Is there an opportunity to have a separate parking regulation for what I would call high profile trucks? These are the larger than life F-150, F-250 trucks that park in the residential areas that make it very difficult for people to get out of their driveways for visibility purposes.
They don't quite meet a
commercial standards, but they're
Sure.
big and sometimes they have a business logo on them.
Let me first cover the first part of what you said. So it's a public street. And so the reality is of being able to prohibit someone from parking on the public street, that's gonna be the challenge. When you talk about the private institution, et cetera, there's, having worked with many a school district, there's different rules for different folks type of situation, but here it's a public street, and unless there's something prohibiting a person from parking on the street, I wanted to talk to that. On the height restriction, some cities, I can't speak.
Can I go back?
Yes,
I'm
please.
not, I get that.
Yeah,
I don't believe that they're gonna stop driving unless somebody provides them with another alternative.
Right.
And that's where a partnership with the school, we work very hard to have that with the district, of enforcing, using the student lot that they have
Right.
for carpools to try and help reduce the volume of cars.
Right.
I don't think a permit program is gonna work, quite frankly.
so most situations that I've been in, it's been about the neighborhood coalition collaborating with the high school to try to bring that nuance together through your request as a good neighbor program. And that's where I've seen the most impact when it comes to that type of change in behavior, because parking is really about learned behavior. And so that's where I've really seen is the neighborhood influence to the high school. In regards to the high profile vehicles, some cities have enacted, and I haven't necessarily heard it for the high profile trucks, but there are height restrictions on vehicles. So that could be something when we talk about an oversized vehicle rule. We'll take note of that as well to see, what that could potentially look like. But that is something that an oversized vehicle rule typically comes down to height, width, and length of an oversized vehicle as well. So we'll take note of that for sure.
So we do have such a rule.
Thank you, Jim.
So, sorry,
Just one second.
just
Go
go
ahead.
through
Yeah.
real quick. If the vehicle exceeds 8 feet in height,
Perfect.
7 feet in width, or 22 feet long, any one of those three metrics, not combined, but any one of those three, or it's 10,000 pound GVW, which means hefty. Any one of those four metrics, doesn't have to be all of them. That considers an oversized vehicle to be next to the city.
Perfect.
8 feet, 7 feet, 22, 10,000 pounds.
Thank you.
So the only thing that's gonna work in my neighborhood is permit parking, prohibiting parking between 10 o'clock at night or 8 o'clock and 6 in the morning for the pickup trucks who don't live directly in the neighborhood. They come from 3 blocks away or up their ferry, as somebody else brought up otherwise. That's what's gonna work. And you're basically saying on a public street, this is never gonna happen with a mandatory permit parking. I think I hear that's what you're saying.
In most communities, it would be very difficult for you to prohibit that neighbor from parking on
Even
street.
with a permit parking program,
It would
giving
be-
him alternatives of parking in Macy's, what's not being used in other areas, this would not happen.
The ability to offer alternatives is definitely something that is encouraged, to be able to provide those infrastructure opportunities. But the reality of establishing a residential parking permit program that is distinguishing between neighbors is something that has not proven to be as effective in other communities.
So here's my real statement. When I was on the grand jury, I met with Jim Myers and mayor at that time, 2019, about this issue. Nothing's happened. I believe you've had a study in 2012, a consulting group. I have no idea how much the city paid for that, but you probably know, and I bet you it was in the hundreds of thousands. Huh?
150.
2024 was 150,000.
No, I thought it was 300.
That's what I was told.
Okay, the prior one, I don't know how much that was, but there was a prior program. I have no idea what your 3-year program's gonna cost, but let's say we're running around $500,000, $600,000 now, and all you're talking about is a voluntary neighborhood program, which is not gonna do anything at all. Why are we wasting all this money? If the city is not willing to do anything,
Yes,
just quit wasting our money.
yes.
It's convenient because the mayor will be out of office in 3 years and the council people, so they can all walk away and run for other offices. But you're just wasting our money, frankly.
Yes.
My name's John. I own a house up on Lincoln Hill, and I have a shop down on Kerner. It's funny, this magic wand thing. So one day I wake up and the city had just come and red striped half of our street.
Exactly.
no discussion, no nothing. And so people that were parked there because of the fire. And I get that, the fire thing, but it would have been nice to get a notice. Same thing on Kerner, where it used to be like, people could park there from the canal, and now one day, no longer overnight parking. And that caused so many goddamn issues. And like, the city's, totally dysfunctional. I've had to deal with the city for so many different things, and nobody's in charge. And I was at the 700 Irwin meeting, if you even call it that, where the developers are shoving this development down our throats, and the city's like, oh, our hands are tied, we can't do anything about it. Then the onus of this whole situation falls on the city. If you guys are gonna line your money, your pockets, with money from developers and do all these new projects that's gonna increase taxes, then you guys have to figure out the parking problem.
Yes.
And whether you take an abandoned lot and make a parking structure, or whatever the hell it's gonna be, but this shouldn't be our problem, coming down here on a Thursday night, talking to you guys, and without any solutions.
Right on.
This is just total bullshit.
I think what we keep hearing over and over and over again, we don't want another Marydale situation, we don't want another Irwin Street situation. We're tired of hiring consultants year in and year out and getting nothing for it. And the suggestion was made, the city, you got Jim here, you have Angela here, they need to go back and ask us what the issue is. Go back to the drawing board, stop giving us something in the middle of that's not gonna work.
Absolutely.
We are tired of it, we're not gonna put up with it anymore.
Yeah, I wish I could fail up.
Thank you.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, we should vote him out of office, but we can't, that's
All on,
Another man next door.
Yeah.
What's the Marydale situation? I don't know what you're talking about.
The small houses.
Let's
small
not,
house.
let's not go there. Oh, okay, got it. All right, thank you.
Which I think she had, did you have your hand up? Did you have your hand up?
I'm
sorry.
sure.
I did.
Okay, so I thought she had
Go
her
ahead.
hand up.
She did. Okay. Well, actually, perhaps two. I just want to clarify something that you said earlier, and you said it's majority, so that means anything over 50% would trigger a request for residential parking.
So that policy would have to be defined because it hasn't been created. What I was sharing was that it varies by community. I've seen it from 50% plus one. I've seen it 65, 75, 85. It just depends on ultimately.
Who decides that?
So ultimately, as the policy is shaped. So if as the RPP residential parking permit program policy is shaped, that can be one of the rules that's determined, and a lot of it again depends on your feedback and input. I've seen that debated in many a community, but in some communities it could be 50 plus one, and some communities it's 75, and everywhere in between.
But it's not a residential parking permit. It's some kind of thing where neighbors get together and say, we would like to buy some spots.
We want to establish that this is the zone.
Doesn't stop pickup trucks from parking all over the streets or anything else. It does.
So again, if using the example that I gave earlier with the 4 contiguous blocks, let's just say by this hypothetical neighborhood, these 4 blocks, they hit the majority number, whatever that is. Everything meets the numbers, the occupancy numbers demonstrate that there's a challenge, and ultimately the program is adopted. 51% of the neighbors purchase a parking permit, and then whatever those rules are, I'm just gonna use the example that I use as the high school, then you would have to have a permit to park beyond the posted time limit between Monday through Friday from 7 to 3, using that example. The persons with the permit in that neighborhood would be eligible to park for longer. But if I was a visitor, I would only be allowed to park for, let's just say 2 hours is what the time limit would say. So there is a parking permit in that neighborhood that's valid by that high school, Monday through Friday from 7 to 3, for example.
If I may, excuse me, Richard, we're not gonna go beyond 8:30, but I think it would be very useful to the staff at this point in time to have a sense of culling the sentiment in the room. And if I can suggest this, and perhaps you can take notes on this, there seems to be a consensus with this group of neighbors that the problem hasn't been defined. So that might be something where you could start. I know you're along the line in your process. The problem needs to be defined. And there's also seems to be consensus that there isn't enough parking, and that there are solutions that are just by taking a fresh look at the way that people park in the city, that may not be that challenging, like, an empty parking lot being available for overnight parking kind of thing. And so my suggestion at this point is, we're reading the room, but make a suggestion like that. So hey, go back and define, like as you said at the beginning, define the problem. And then the second thing would be get input from the neighbors about the problem before you come up with the solution of a parking permit program, so that people can weigh in. Because we're just kind of a small sampling of all the neighbors, and I think there are a lot of good ideas out there. I hadn't thought of using, for example, a parking lot that is abandoned at night. And that might be a much easier solution in the long run, with the city dealing with the liability and all that stuff, than having everybody angry in all the neighborhoods. So that's what I'm suggesting, is you take note of that.
And just before we move on, could I just highlight, because I just want to be sure, I saw some folks taking a photo. I just wanted to be sure we put up the contact information here, so that any questions moving forward, you can contact Priya, that's her email address. And I just also wanted to reiterate, we'll still be here to answer questions, that there's going to be a survey that'll be available on the city's website next week. There will also be a press release. Sorry, Rich.
Do you have a contact information?
Sure, I can definitely put that up there. Would you mind to type that up there? They were looking for our contact information.
What about people
She
that
wanted
don't
our
use the
contact.
computer?
If you can use Priya as the point of contact, she'll send all of the messages to us.
I'm also going to throw out as a possible thing for you to consider is to wait with the survey until you've gotten the input from the neighbors defining the problems.
Yeah, what questions are you asking?
Because the survey already defines your vision or whatever, the city's vision.
It doesn't though, the surveys don't.
Yeah.
That's it, they don't define problems or anything.
I know, I'm just saying that that's what they're doing now. And, yeah, and I think no one would argue with the fact that the current ordinance is out of date. It's just, it's out of sight, 1,500 households in a neighborhood. So no one's arguing with the fact that that's out of date, but they're arguing with the fact that they don't see what the problem is, and they're afraid that the survey is just gonna get the kind of answers that the city already wants.
Right. Forced choice surveys.
So there needs to be the mechanism for the input. We've heard a lot of what's wrong. There needs to be, it sounds like a mechanism to quantify that input, to submit that input, to make sure that that is heard before solutions are proposed.
Well, the survey's coming out next week, so
Well,
we're gonna start over?
It hasn't come out yet.
It hasn't come out
Change
yet.
that.
We're a week away.
Like it's being printed, they're not gonna have any impact on it now.
I don't know.
Yes.
Can you edit the survey?
That,
Question.
it sounds like that's a suggestion for your group.
Yeah.
The
Right.
survey is premature.
Yes.
And I know that the city is working on a timeline, but it seems to me that there would be a very simple way of garnering advice from the residents. Simple as, instead of putting the survey on your website, said, hey, if you could change the parking situation write a comment in one sentence.
But even that,
No.
do you think there's a problem? Some people don't think there's a problem in the
Okay.
neighborhood. Some
All
people
right.
are open-minded. I thought the whole
they want to
bond
submit
thing,
something.
I'm like, I don't agree with that first sentence.
Yeah, so do you think there's a problem? If you do think there's a problem, what are your constructive suggestions?
Exactly, but
Something
they're not
like
even
that.
asking from us what the
It's so
suggestions are.
simpler.
Something can go out next week.
It's real simple. I just got a letter saying, from Public Works, saying they're gonna be doing some work on my streets for pavement or something. Went out to everybody in the neighborhood. You send out a letter to everybody in the neighborhood with a website on it or something like that, and saying, please go onto this website and fill out this about the parking issue. And then you won't get 100% compliance, but you'll get 50%.
Open-ended.
Everybody gets an
And,
Meetings like
it's not
this-
hard.
In meetings like this, I think all of our comments should be recorded.
Yes.
We should have a recorder who is up there
It's being
writing
recorded.
down.
It's being
everything.
recorded.
Notes are being taken and video is being taken, so
Right.
everything is being captured. But I think that it sounds to me like the feedback is more input from people who are experiencing the problem before designing a solution.
And then my other question is,
So that is the
But
feedback.
the thrust of the consulting study is a total waste, because they're dealing with this voluntary, whatever you're calling it, and I hear almost no one here thinking that's gonna be sufficient. So why are we paying them for a 3-year program to do something that's not gonna yield any valuable result?
What I'm hearing tonight is the possibility of asking for the input that has begun to be vocalized here in some more official way to work that into a proposed solution.
But the narrow limits of what you're doing, and she's been honest about it, is not gonna accomplish what anything you people have said you want here. It's a total waste.
Mark, we're gonna move to other people and then we're gonna see if we can make a difference with these folks.
Yeah.
Is there any way to be able to contact or work with the engineering department? I'm very curious, just personally, to see how much studies has been done on the different streets and why certain streets like, Kettner, the one you mentioned, Kettner, is that the one?
Kerner, yeah.
Okay, so that is.
I noticed that the parking along there used to be, and then that's changed. Now, that, I was actually surprised why that whole area, which served a lot of people, all of a sudden was.
That would be one of the suggestions.
So
Right.
that's just.
So that's the question, is it possible to, you know?
Exactly.
And so if we do have a mechanism for collecting input now from the kinds of things that we're hearing tonight,
Right.
you get on that site, you fill out that question, Priya gets it, she distributes it
I
out.
know, but I only know about this one street and I.
That's all you need to know about.
No, I know, but I wanna know about the rest of the city.
That's your question.
Yeah, I wanna know what has been done,
Yeah,
what streets were
yeah,
being
yeah.
studied and,
Yeah,
you know.
you have Priya's email address.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
My understanding is that there was a fair amount of data collection done in the canal, Spinnaker, Bay Point, and the results of that were overwhelmingly that there is a need for some kind of parking resolution. Why wasn't that data, why isn't that area, our area,
Why wasn't it
reflected
listed?
up there? Because there has been data collected.
So, yes, so, yes.
You have one of the
Yes.
three?
And the report.
No, it's a four, it should be a.
Yeah.
But it wasn't listed
It
on
wasn't
the
up
site.
there.
It was because of where the city ended up with the East San Rafael, basically for the canal streets in that area, and the end output of there not being a solution for that location.
So they just gave up.
I know. No, that's
Wait, the data was collected
it's not,
and then they
and there's,
oh, well, we just.
it's not, for that specific location.
I just wanna put a,
Hang on, yep.
Because they held a meeting and talked about the option.
I just wanna put a button on how, what, like you're suggesting that we submit these questions and suggestions. To who, to where? I
Right
mean,
here.
We have some city people here.
Right here.
We have.
Here's,
You know.
here is Priya Nixon. Priya, will you stand up? This
Oh,
is Priya.
Okay.
You have her email
My
address.
contact right there.
Okay,
She
and
is
are
the
you-
central point to collect any and all suggestions, feedback, etc. She will distribute it out as appropriate to be able to get answers.
Or the
Make
other
it
engineering.
constructive.
Yes.
There's no time to complain. This is my idea, right? Just assume that this, nothing's gonna happen that she presented. Here's my idea.
Do we have your commitment, Priya, that you will take this feedback all the way to the top so that it could possibly influence changing direction of all of this whole, solution that's been paid for, that really is not a solution? I mean, we have your commitment that you will try to change the process here so that the community feedback can actually have some impact rather than it being too late?
Could we hear from Jim Myers, because isn't he in charge of parking?
Just a second.
And I'm assistant city manager, and so yes, I mean, that's why we're here tonight. Nothing has been decided. The only direction that we've received from the city council is the 2012 policy needs to be updated because it doesn't, it's virtually impossible for any neighborhood that does determine that there is a need for a parking permit program to even achieve it, because it's 1,500 households. And so again, there may be some feedback from this group that we don't think the policy should be updated. We're fine with the way that there is no problem. I mean, so, but all of that feedback will be collected and to inform the council on what direction we should take.
Respond to you, ma'am. So we haven't seen the 2012 policy, so maybe it isn't problematic.
No, it's
It might be good to see it. I mean, maybe we have.
It's on the website, so
Okay.
you can go back to, and we
All right.
can share these slides.
Okay.
We can share on the first slides, it's where the information about the update to the residential parking permit program is. There's a link to the 2012 policy.
Okay, that's good to know.
And you can see, what it is.
Gotcha,
You'll see-
gotcha. My second question is, what about people, I have some people even older than me, believe it or not, in my neighborhood who don't use computers. So how do they put in there, but they drive still, or park in front of their houses, so they might like be.
I can give them my phone number.
Can they get a paper, like he suggested, can you just print out the survey or whatever, once you design it and mail it?
Come in and get paper.
Come in and get it, they're not gonna do that, neither am I.
Well, you could take us 10 of them and pass them out to them.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I would do.
And then I want to sort of reiterate what you were saying, is that the neighborhood, sort of the industrial area around Shamrock, about 10 years ago, all of a sudden, everything became like red zones or very limited. It's like the businesses were able to pressure the city to make limited parking there. So then people from that area, who would normally park there, as you said, switch off trucks and such to work, would then move into other neighborhoods because they couldn't park there anymore. So why did the businesses, why were they able to push onto the city and say, we want red zones here? So that whatever their employees or, I don't know, turning their trucks around or whatever needs they had. How come they were able to make that kind of pressure onto the city but residents aren't able to?
Jim, do you wanna answer that?
Isn't it more likely it had something to do with homeless?
Maybe.
Please be quiet so you can hear.
Yeah.
I will try.
Yeah.
I think it goes back to, you asked us. I'm not the traffic engineer. I don't know why Shamrock has it. It doesn't seem like it would be for their employees because it's all red zones down there, right? That's what you said. So ask the question. Let us look into why that was changed. Maybe there's a specific reason. I don't know. Narrow some their roads. I don't know. But I'd be glad to try to get the answer for you because it doesn't
I
seem.
mean, the whole area.
I got you. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I think the best bet is to, as they asked, just submit it and say, why did this happen, Jim? Okay, we'll find out for you. I don't know. I don't know.
A fundamental issue here is that we are on step 4 of a 6-step program where we are now recognized as stakeholders. Stakeholders need to be in the beginning.
Step 1.
So whatever you've done so far is completely biased and without input from the stakeholders. So I would say, yes, back to the drawing board, and the first thing to do is ask us. Don't send a train hurtling down the tracks towards us as a fait accompli.
So can you say that in an email to Priya? And
She's saying it right now.
start that process.
That way we can answer it in writing. so
Start that
get the right
process.
answer.
Okay, we'll do that.
Remember, the parking department asked for this meeting to present what's going on and get feedback. We're hearing a lot of feedback, and we are, I think, beginning to develop a mechanism to quantify that feedback, to collect the feedback. And, you know, if you want to be a stakeholder at the beginning of the process, then state that. I mean, we may be at step 4. We may need, you know, one request could be, let's go back to step 2, or maybe step 1, and get the input that's necessary before the solution is designed.
Yes, obviously, that's why we're here.
I think that's why we're here. I'm gonna talk now. I know we're in storming before we do forming, norming, performing, right? We're definitely storming, no
Yeah.
question. So thanks for having
Which,
me.
which is great.
But what I'm really perplexed by, and I'll represent Bay Point Lagoon, sorry, there's quite a few of us here tonight, we're exhausted, a lot going on in our neighborhood. But if clearly there was a problem, why was the research not listed there? That the research was done, we have not come up with a solution yet, but we clearly know there's a problem. Why weren't we listed? I'm just clueless on that.
So the reality is we're trying to shape a residential parking permit policy so that we can update 2012. So that's why what I tried to lay out for you all is just so that you could understand how things are working throughout California. It wasn't intended to be any specific area. We've collected data in other neighborhoods because we have all of the data that we collected in your project. So what we were showcasing here was that we've also collected data in other neighborhoods too, so that if other neighborhoods identify that they have a challenge or an issue, your issue has been identified and defined. And this was not intended to be specific to a neighborhood. This was intended to be a citywide policy update. And the reality is the familiarity of what we have in your neighborhood. The data has been collected, the recommendations have been printed, and we are now trying to update the policies and leveraging the information that we also learned from that experience as well, but here to gather your feedback so that we can update that 2012 policy.
The question is though, is it, a policy is to solve some problem. You guys, as you said, you've already done everything. You've already defined the problem, which determines what data you're going to look for. You've already determined what the problem is. We don't even know what you think the problem is. And what we've learned here is that there's a lot of different problems depending on the neighborhood. And I'm not convinced that you've addressed any of those or even defined them, because we've seen nothing. We've been not a part of any of this, of determining what the policy is supposed to do.
But that's actually why we're here to determine.
Yeah, but you've already made the recommendations.
The recommendations
You
for
just
East,
said you've already
for
done,
East-
collected the data, made the recommendations.
No,
You've already
I think you missed
decided.
the point.
That's what
Forgive
you
me.
said.
There was a project for East San Rafael. That was a project that was several years long. That was very specific to that neighborhood. This is a different project, and it's the reason why we didn't bring that data to the table, because of the fact that this is specifically about updating the outdated citywide policy. And the reality is this is intended to be a solution for the entire city, so that as a neighborhood moves forward with the interest in a residential parking permit program. So that was a very specific project for East San Rafael. And now this is about updating the policy. That's why I think it's important for you to all understand there haven't been recommendations. That was a very specific project for East San Rafael. This project here is why we are here to hear from you, is to influence and inform this policy and to understand that we need to be sure that this solution is updated to address all neighborhood needs. And the only reason why it wasn't listed on that map was because that information was a part of that other project. This was additional data that was collected so that we would have baseline information for other neighborhoods besides East San Rafael.
But this is only the residential voluntary program, right?
Mark, we're gonna turn it back to Richard as the convener.
We should all leave now. Julie, I appreciate you being here. I think this was informative, and I appreciate the city bringing us out. I think that part of and I'm hoping that the city will hear that there is input not just on the permit program, but also on the process, and that the city will bring that back. I also really feel that a parking program that's isolated from the Department of Public Works and from community development and planning is problematic, and that I hope that the city works, pulls all of its departments together to work on this, including enforcement, because any kinds of programs that don't have enforcement, don't have public works solutions as part of them, and don't have our planning department and our community development department fully in on quality of life for the existing neighborhoods and for our neighbors that are here to come, are not going to be holistic solutions. So I hope that the city takes that back as well.
All right, before we close, we just have a minute or so remaining. Again, I want to reiterate what Kate said. We want to thank our city partners for coming out tonight and explaining what they're doing. And this group of people thinks that the survey is premature. And this group of people would like to help define the problem, if any. And this group of people is filled with suggestions. And it wouldn't surprise me if other groups of people felt the same way. So I'd like to end on that note. I'd like us to be constructive, and I would like us to understand that you can make a difference. And please leave with a good sense of spirit that they've come to us, they want to hear our voices, and that I think you've made an impact tonight. So for what it's worth, thanks for coming, thanks for listening, and may the force be with us.